In this problem and the next, we're going to build a large portion of our JavaScript parser. In particular, we're first going to focus on JavaScript statements. And to make it even easier, we're really only going to consider 6 types of statements. If then, so if you have an if statement, basically. If then else, so here we're going to handle a JavaScript statement, something like this, and then also an else. Whereas this first type of statement is just this portion. Whereas the if then else handles all of this. We're going to also do assignment. So a variable x equals, say, 5. Return statements. An example of that in JavaScript will look like this, where we have the return keyword followed by an expression. Here I just have 5. We have 2 ones left, one involving declaration, namely using the var keyword. So this declares a variable x and sets it to 5 versus just setting it to 5 later on. And the last type we're going to handle in this portion is just the existence of an expression. You can have in your JavaScript an expression in the middle of your code. So instead of stuff here, we could just say 5. This doesn't do anything, but it says the number 5, and it's valid JavaScript. So this is pretty straightforward if you just follow the rules that were given at the top of the program. And we're going to go straight to the IDE and work through it one by one. So here I have my interpreter ready for us to get started with this question. So here I have the rule for a function, and we're going to write this out. Here I'm telling the parser that this is going to be a parse rule for the element non-terminal, and I'm going to call this one the function parse rule. The first thing is going to be a string that tells the parser when to apply this rule. So here I say an element can go to the terminal function, an identifier, the left paren, some optional parentheses, a right paren, followed by a compound sequence of statements. And once this has been matched, I'm going to apply it such that element is going to be the tuple with the word function, the name of the function, which is going to be the identifier, the optional parameters, which is number 4, and then 6 is going to be the compound statements. An element can also just be a statement, which is going to be some sort of statement followed by a semicolon. The tuple that it matches is going to be the word statement and the contents of that statement. Here I have my 2 rules for optional parameters. And as the name implies, the parameters can be optional, so op params can go to nothing, or it can be a sequence of parameters. Now, parameters can be some kind of identifier followed by a comma and more parameters, or it can be 1, or the last parameter is just going to be an identifier. Notice how I put the identifier in a list because parameters are always a list, even if there's just one thing in them. A compound statement is a sequence of statements in between a left brace and a right brace. I've written out the rules for statements. Statements can be empty, so you can have nothing in between your left and right braces. Or it can be a single statement and a semicolon followed by more statements. So now we're going to define the statements. Let's start with if. If we do have an if statement, we're going to put it in a tuple in our parse tree, where the first entry in the tuple is the string if then to indicate that it's an if statement. The second one is going to be the expression of the if statement, and the last element of our tuple are going to be the compound statements that comprise the then. In the if then else, we have very similar structure, except we've also added an else, which is going to be an additional entry in our tuple. That is the sequence of statements that you do if the expression is not evaluated to be true. Here we have assignment. It's going to be an identifier. Let's say x equals the equal sign, and then some expression, say 5. And in our parse tree, we're going to put assign the identifier, and then the expression to which the identifier is set. For return, we're just going to do return, and then the expression that we are returning. We use the keyword var to declare and set a variable. So we're going to have the keyword var followed by an identifier, the equal sign, and the expression. In our parse tree, we're going to put var, the identifier, and the expression. So to make this a little more concrete, it would be as if we were doing this, and the tuple that we'd put in our parse tree is going to be var, comma, x, comma, 5. And lastly, we say a statement can go to an expression, which we haven't defined yet, and we're saving for the next problem. Taken all together, we have much of our JavaScript parser. Well, at the least the part that handles statements.